Hello, welcome to Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance, where we are going to be exploring the topic of borderline personality disorder. This is a follow-up show to one we had before. I am Victoria Fleming with Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling, and this is my husband, Chandler Fleming. Welcome to the show.
Well, welcome. I think I'm going to have her do the introduction much more frequently. I think she does a better job. So.
I don't know, the order was kind of weird, but today we are talking about borderline personality disorder, and we had touched on it before, so there is a previous episode for anyone who's seeing this one and are interested. They could go to YouTube and look it up.
Yeah, look it up, Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance,
but we do
Independence Television.
Yeah, so we do want to look at borderline personality disorder, do a little bit of a review, but the reason we broke it down into two parts is we felt like there needed to be a very informative first show that just dealt with what makes it borderline personality disorder, and then a follow-up, so now what? What do I do with if I do have borderline or I know someone who is borderline personality disorder? So as we look at this, let's first look at the fact that borderline personality disorder does fall under the bigger personality disorders, and they are characterized by it's a pervasive pattern of maladaptive coping or functioning within a characteristics of the person's personality, expression style, or personal attributes beginning in adolescence or early adulthood and lasting fairly consistently throughout life. This is not better explained by another diagnosis, and that's an important element of it. But then looking more specifically at the borderline personality, and we just kind of want to run through these, we want to look at what makes it borderline personality disorder. And we'll look at the DSM-5 criteria for that. And it is a pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affects, and marked impulsivity. So that's a global look at it.
And instability is the key word there, that there's a lot of unstableness in relationships, in job performance, in a lot of areas of their life, and so there's that instability is pretty important. And just to jump backwards a little bit, that personality disorder, it is that pervasive pattern, which means that it's an ongoing thing, that it's not just a couple bad days or whatever, but overall, year after year, that this style continues to exist. And some of the stuff that we talk about today, we're describing the disorder itself, borderline personality disorder, but we're also kind of trying to help out people who themselves may have just a lot of traits. I mean, they don't maybe meet enough criteria for it to be the disorder, but that they have enough traits that there's enough overlap that this might be helpful.
Okay, because we've talked about before that borderline personality disorder comes from maladaptive coping.
Yes.
You know, so a person, as you said, may not meet all the criteria, but maybe thinking, ooh, I have some of those. So let's just run through. If you look at the DSM-5 criteria, borderline personality disorder, we are looking at frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, unstable interpersonal relationship with alternating love and hate. There's an identity disturbance. There's impulsivity in at least two potentially dangerous areas. And we will go ahead and continue to the next slide, where it's going to show also that there can be recurrent suicidal behavior. There can be affective instability, so mood, that mood is unstable due to marked reactivity of the mood. Chronic feelings of emptiness, inappropriate intense anger or lack of anger, love, hate, intense or lack, transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. So that's just in a nutshell looking at the DSM-5, what the criteria are. And as I said, there's another episode if someone wants to hear that in more detail.
Right.
But now a person is looking and thinking, I know someone.
Right.
I am that someone. What to do?
Yeah, and that's really where we wanted to put most of our effort, is to really try to give some people some practical guidelines on what should they do and what are those important steps. So we start out with number one is remember the pain. When I first received training on borderline personality disorder, there was a lady who talked about people with borderline personality disorder being the burn victim of psychiatric care, that everything hurts, that there is an intense pain there. And the person suffering from borderline personality disorder needs to remember that that they are experiencing pain in an intense way, and that there's reasons that they got there. Most people with borderline personality disorder have extreme trauma in their childhood or in their early life that causes them to kind of move that way.
Could you give some examples of that trauma?
Well, sometimes it's sexual abuse or physical abuse, some horrific things like, maybe kidnapping or just alcoholic parents who are never available. Those sort of things that are very deeply traumatizing are frequently in those history. One lady I treated who had borderline personality disorder, her mother would leave her in a hot car for hours, and she would just sweat and sweat and sweat. And that abuse and that trauma, and when she get out, there would be more pain and then go back into the car.
Okay.
So some pretty largely traumatic events.
And like you said, and then there is that pattern of maladaptive coping, trying to make sense out of the mother who's supposed to care for me is now abusing me. I don't even know what to do with this.
Right. And oftentimes that maladaptive coping comes after the fact. The history of borderline personality disorder was that at one time it was referred to as a dissociative disorder, that the people would just kind of zone out. But during those times of intense trauma, they normally would zone out. But now the maladaptive usually comes afterwards. How do I deal with that history of trauma?
Okay, so remember the pain. What is important in remembering the pain for the individual with borderline personality disorder or some strong traits of it, as well as for the person working with or who knows that individual?
Sure. So remember the pain. There's a reason for it. If you suffer from borderline personality disorder or have those traits, self-loathing doesn't help. I know so many people who have it that hate themselves because they hate themselves, which seems kind of strange, but or they feel unstable because they feel unstable, and you need to recognize that there's a reason behind it. And then also therapy does help.
Okay.
That personality disorders, it takes a lot of therapy and long term, and it helps. And then if you live with somebody that you think has borderline traits, you need to remember it's painful, that it's not something that they enjoy. And oftentimes, that gets confused. They're doing this on purpose. They're just trying to get even. And sometimes they are trying to get even, but it's really based out of a sickness that they don't know how to relate in a healthy way. And it's important that they're behaving that way because bad things have happened, if they don't cope well, and they are in intense pain.
And I appreciate what you said the supervisor compared it to, it being the burn victim. And I worked in the hospital, and the burn victim is the person that the change in air pressure causes pain.
Yep.
Yeah, so just a high sensitivity for pain
Right.
in those individuals. Okay, so what's another facet?
So the other facet to it is beware of that cycle. There's a cycle of overvaluing and devaluing. We call it good mom, bad mom, or even in that cycle of overvaluing, undervaluing, the mixed messages of go away closer, I hate you, don't leave me. So it's really confusing. And people with borderline personality disorder oftentimes really, really love and feel like their needs are met and are greatly engaged in that relationship. And then a little while longer, they hate the person. And it's important to remember that the person, especially during those times of hate, is the same person you loved yesterday is the same person that you hate today. And that you need to take a longer term view of it. Some people actually take a journal, and they have to kind of journal what they think about their relationships. And during those high stress times where they feel abandoned, they feel like the other person's out to get them, that they can go back and look at the journal. And the other thing is just learning to scale, that oftentimes with people with borderline personality disorder, everything's a 10. So the good's a 10, it's a great day, but if it's a bad day, that's a 10 too. And sometimes by, spilling milk, that might be a 4 on a 10 scale. Wrecking your car, that might be a 9. Wrecking a car and your child dies, that's probably a 10. Mm-hmm. Sorry for the crude example, but you have to kind of scale things out. And then being somebody that has to deal with somebody, it's important to remember that if they hate you today, that they might love you tomorrow, and that there is a pattern to it. And be aware that there's a pattern to it, that there are good days to come.
Okay, so it would be the individual with the borderline personality disorder who would be keeping the journal and trying to learn how to scale and recognize, okay, I'm going into this and everything's a 10, but I need to stop and think and really analyze, do both of these equal a 10, and start gauging, as you said, the spilt milk versus the car accident. For the person who is dealing with that individual that is an explosive 10 all the time, then you do want to recognize that the hate is temporary, that heightened, passionate hate is temporary, and that it's very often has nothing to do with you. And that's super important if you can remove it being personal. Do not argue or dispute, because you're going to heighten the response. And then to respond with balance, love, and boundaries. And what does that look like, that balance, love, and boundaries?
Well, I think it's reassuring that the person that, yes, I'm angry with you, but I'm not leaving. I'm here for the long run. I care about you, your best interest. No, I won't tolerate that. You know what, we need to take a break. I'm going for a walk, but I'm coming back. Okay. Because abandonment is such a big issue that it's really, really important to have that balance.
Okay, so we have the overvalue, undervalue. What's another aspect in managing this borderline personality disorder?
You know, in just about every treatment of borderline personality disorder, the subject of boundaries come up. And boundaries is where you begin and where the outside world exists. And people with borderline personality disorder have a hard time developing boundaries. And initially, they may appear to be very nice, good friend material. They're very open and honest. But then they sometimes over-disclose. They get too close too quick. They trust people that they shouldn't. So if you suffer with borderline personality disorder, recognize that you have that pattern, that in past relationships, maybe you did over-disclose and felt vulnerable later. Recognize that relationships tend to have a progression. It takes time to build. And you oftentimes, because you don't have a good sense of boundaries, you have to trust somebody else's. You might have to trust your therapist or a close loved one at the moment to say, yeah, I probably wouldn't share that amount of money with somebody or that amount of personal information until more time goes by.
Which is where a journal could also be helpful, because you could start recording some of those areas where it seemed like it didn't work.
Right.
You know, and start being more aware. I know that the slide came up, there was the terrorist dilemma for the person dealing with the borderline personality individual. So what do you mean exactly by the terrorist dilemma in dealing with a borderline personality person?
Sure. So if you live with somebody with borderline personality disorder, the terrorist dilemma almost always comes. That if you don't give in to the terrorists, they'll kill the hostages. But if you do give in to the terrorists, they keep taking hostages. And oftentimes that's the feeling that people who live with somebody with borderline personality disorder is, if I don't do what she, and most people with borderline are female, if she doesn't get what she wants, she might commit suicide, or she might hurt me, or she might divorce me, or she might take revenge. But then when you start to give in on a consistent basis, they're constantly leveraging the relationship.
Okay.
They're constantly saying, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to blow things up. And
okay, so help. What does a good boundary look like then for that person, particularly say if it's a spouse who is feeling leveraged all the time and maybe did give in too often and now they're trying to regain some solid ground and footing? How do you develop that boundary?
So you develop that boundary by saying, I love you, I care about you, but if you are suicidal, let's call 911 now. So I need to know, are you safe? And if you're not safe, then we need to take care of it. You know what, if you decide to leave, you know, I will do my very best, but that's a choice that you need to make. And I love you, I care about you, but I can't be moved by your threats.
Okay.
So if there's a positive way that you want us to approach this, then let's look at it from a more positive way.
Okay, so that establishing of very healthy boundaries
Right.
is super important for the well-being of the individual with the borderline personality, as well as for those dealing with
Yep.
that individual. What other aspects in better managing do we have?
Well, you know, I think the other thing is what to do is really understand the manipulation piece. And I think the word manipulation, it definitely has a bad connotation in our society. we tend to think bad things about when we think of manipulation, but most people get what they want in a very indirect way. They don't flat out ask somebody. If a guy went up to a woman and said, I'm not sure if I like you or not, but I'd like to get to know you a little bit better, and you're probably a 7 on a 10 scale. Do you want? But let's go out and have a drink, and if I like you, maybe I'll do more, but I'm not really sure. Hey, what do you think? It wouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. So people tend to get what they want in very indirect ways. And where manipulation fails is that the technique is poor, that people feel exploited or used or misrepresented or deceived. And there's a big misconception you'll oftentimes hear is people with borderline personality disorder are great manipulators. Well, they're really not. It's if you don't come home, I'm going to catch the house on fire. Well, that's not a good manipulation. Now, they are desperately trying to get what they want, but they don't have the skills. So if you are somebody, you have to learn how to kindly ask for what you want and consider the long term and the short term. Where I used to work, if I walked into the front office and screamed, I want a pencil, I'd get a pencil pretty quick. But it wouldn't work over time, and it'd probably get me fired. So it's looking at how do I get what I want in the short term that doesn't jeopardize the long term. And then if you are that person who lives with somebody who suffers with borderline personality disorder, it's recognize they're not good at manipulating. They're not good at asking for what they want. And oftentimes what they want is a good thing. They want love, attention, identity, but they have a hard time asking for it in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm. They're wanting security. They're wanting to know you are with them for the long haul. And something I feel like I'm hearing over and over is do not take it personally.
Sure.
That for someone dealing with a borderline personality individual, it is not a personal attack, it is their maladaptive coping and their desperate desire to feel loved, to feel safe, to feel protected, and they just don't know how to do it well. And I think that's super important is if we can remember this is not against me or about me, this is about the individual.
Right.
We respond differently.
And that's really difficult. There are many therapists themselves that limit the number of people with borderline personality that they see because it can be very demanding. And you sometimes feel trapped because with that over-idealization where they love you and love you and love you and you're the best therapist ever, and then it changes, it can be quite difficult. So
call and say you're fired the next day. Yeah.
Right. And I've been fired and rehired by a lot of my clients that do have borderline personality disorder. They fire me one day, they hire me the next. And so it is really important. And it kind of ties in with our next slide, which is on irreverence. And it's a word that in my very first training they brought up, that oftentimes with borderline personality disorder, everybody gets way uptight and takes things far, far too seriously. And it's hard to find the humor in your trauma, but sometimes you have to. So if you're that person suffering from borderline personality disorder and you think something's really, really horrible, it is sometimes beneficial to look for what's the humor in it. Mm-hmm. And remember the magic twos, which is this really going to matter in 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 days? And get out of that feeling zone and get into that thinking zone.
And I so appreciate that it says for the collateral person, try to find the humor, but recognize that the suffering person may not see the humor.
Sure. Yeah.
Which again just makes it awkward and makes it hard. But if I can learn to laugh rather than take it so personally, it's going to make a healthier boundary.
Right.
And we're going to navigate the waters better.
Yeah. The lady who did this training, she talked about a lady who came in to see her who suffered from borderline personality disorder. And the lady said, I'm just going to kill myself. And she says, you can't. We have an appointment next Tuesday. Which I thought was funny.
I like it.
And the lady said, well, okay, I guess I'll see you Tuesday. So it's a certain level of don't get caught up in the drama And that's a big teenage word today, but there's a lot of drama with borderline personality disorder. Don't get caught up in your own drama, but don't get caught up in the other person's drama.
Because it feels like drama to them.
Right.
For sure.
And it's real, and the pain is real.
And that's the careful balance as well, is there's a respect that happens, or treating the borderline personality person with respect in recognizing it is maladaptive coping.
It is.
So what next? So we try to better manage. Is there more help?
I think there's all sorts of help. The hard thing is, if you are the person who suffers from borderline personality disorder, it's hard to form trust. And that makes therapy difficult, but there is therapy available. And if you are living with somebody who has borderline personality disorder, sometimes that person will feel it's betrayal that you're going to get help, but help is available and it works. I would recommend somebody who does dialectical behavioral therapy. It's probably the #1 form of treatment for people who have borderline traits of borderline personality disorder, and it's quite effective in promoting recovery.
Okay, what is it? Define a little bit, dialectical.
A dialectical is a hard word to define, but it's a contradiction, two opposing contradictions that have meaning. So if it's the middle of if it's the middle of January and it's 50 degrees outside, wow, it's warm. But if it's the middle of June and it's 50 degrees outside, it's cold. And those both things are true, but based on the context and the other things, there's meaning in both. And the other example is nobody eats there anymore because it's too busy. That doesn't seem to make sense. Nobody eats there anymore because it's too busy, but there's meaning in what appears to be a contradiction.
And so it's that very skilled art of helping the person better identify what seems opposing but true to both of those meanings. Right. And so it is navigating, because to the person with borderline personality disorder, they're in conflict over that.
Right.
And it's discordant. And so it is a skilled way of navigating and making more sense, holistic sense of that information.
Yep.
So, and I so appreciate what you said about the person living. If you're a collateral and you are living with someone, very often therapy is helpful for you because it's able to reset the balance and to help you see, again, it's not personal, and setting healthy boundaries and knowing how to navigate when you're feeling so sucked in to the manipulation, into some of the drama of the borderline.
Oh, for sure.
So, but there is help for borderline personality disorder as well as so many other areas of life. And we do thank you so much for joining us here on Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance. If you have any questions or would like to contact us, please by all means go to our website, which is clarkstonlighthousecounseling.com, or you could certainly call us, and that number would be 248-245-1809. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much for watching.
The views expressed in this show are for general educational purposes only and do not constitute professional advice on any subject matter, nor do they necessarily reflect the views or opinions of its guests or of Independence Television. If mental health assistance is needed, please seek professional licensed treatment.